Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero. Our guest today is Colonel John McKay. He's an adjunct professor of Latin American geography at Sacramento State. Go Hornets. He started his own education growing up in Peru and Mexico, where he worked for his room and board in the ore cars of a mine by the time he was 10. He became an expert horseman and communicated with his co-workers in Quechua and Spanish. He eventually attended the US Naval Academy, was selected as an Olmsted Scholar to attend Universidad Complutense de Madrid, where he did all of his work in Spanish. He earned an MA in Government with a specialty in National Security Affairs from Georgetown and a second MA in National Security Strategy from the National War College in Washington, D.C. He has served and protected us unselfishly as a U.S. Marine, with an unmatched knowledge of Spanish-speaking cultures, which came in handy during the Cuban Missile Crisis. He served 2 combat tours in Vietnam where he was twice wounded, and went on to lead Marines in humanitarian efforts in Europe, West Africa, and of course Latin America. He's a lifetime member of Disabled American Veterans and the Military Order of the Purple Heart. He has an in-depth understanding and appreciation of the current political, military, and business climate in the Spanish-speaking world, and today you'll hear him discuss some of those topics with Pete and our frequent co-host, MAJ Scott Huesing. We're deeply honored to have him. Here's our guest, Colonel John McKay.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Colonel John McKay, and we're on the Break It Down show.
And now, the Break It Down show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Yes, we are. We're here with Scott Huesing, who set all this up, producer. This is great. I would give your bio, but it's ridiculous, so I'm going to have John do that in the opening because of the things you've done and the places you've been and the people you've advised. It's a significant list. So thanks for coming on, man. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me, and I feel honored that I'm with you.
Is this your first podcast?
It is my first podcast.
Nice.
I've done radio,
Nice
I've done
guys.
television, but I've never done a podcast.
We can tell everyone first, we got to acknowledge Margot,
Of course.
your gorgeous wife, is sitting here too. She joined in. She can jump in. She's my official BS flag. Like if the colonel starts spouting off or there's lapses in memory or exaggerations,
Right.
like Margot's going to jump in.
It didn't go like that.
Yeah, that's important.
Yeah.
That's important. That's a great thing to have in the room too. Is like because the Military Wives Network, they don't let anything slide on us. So, but we met at the Marines Memorial Club, and I was so fascinated just meeting and getting a brief introduction, and then reading Colonel McKay's bio. It's nuts, man. It's really nuts. We're the ones that were fortunate to just hang out with you.
Yeah, like the smallest thing on your bio is like, oh, and by the way, he's a professor at Sac State.
Yeah.
Come on.
So tell us a little bit about your upbringing. Your father's raised in the Depression, how that influenced you, and how that moved you into ultimately enlisting in the Marine Corps, because both of us are Mustang officers.
Yeah. As I said, I grew up in Peru. I went down there right before I turned 6 years old. I left the last time when I was 16 years old. My father being a product of the Depression, I'm one of 3 brothers. We're all Marines, but he insisted that we work, and he had a very high-level position as chief engineer of a very big mining company. The company had its own railroad, which was extensive, standard gauge railroad. It also had very large haciendas, and there's a backstory to that, which I won't go into. Starting at age 8, my father was chief engineer, and he had me work on the weekends on the railroad. Now, that's not what you think it sounds like. I started out in the carpenter shop, and I loved it. I mean, 8 years old. And that is where I blessed my father, because I picked up Spanish very quickly. Nobody in the carpenter shop spoke English. And there were a couple that didn't speak Spanish. They spoke Quechua. And I fell in love with the Peruvians. I progressed up, and starting about age 10, I started riding the ore trains. It was all steam. The engineer, the fireman, the brakeman, they were all Peruvians. There was no gringos on the trains. And two of the engineers I became very close to, their primary motive power was a Bayer Peacock 280 steam locomotive manufactured in Britain.
We have no idea what that means in the audience.
That means it's got two front, what's called plow wheels.
Okay.
They're trailer wheels to stabilize the front weight of the boiler. And then there's four drivers on each side. So you designated the two pilot wheels and the four drivers. It's a 280, and there's no trail wheel between the engine and the tender.
Pete, I'm actually going to be the smart one in this one because I actually knew what that meant after hours of watching trains in the Chicago area on Sundays after church with my dad, who's a massive railroad nut. So I did have that piece of trivia. So I always like to one-up Pete. He's so much smarter than me. So
Well,
I did like to know that. But what year was this?
We went down there. Let me see. It was during the Korean War, 51.
50s, yeah.
And my father was still in the Navy Reserve as a commander. He got permission to go back, go out of country. He wasn't going to be called up for the Korean War. But anyway, I did that every weekend. And then when I turned 9, again, the Haciendas was run by a fellow by the name of Bill Snyder. He was a sheep man from Montana. And his assistant was a fellow from Texas, Pete Sellers, who was a cattleman. And that was always an interesting interaction. People in this country don't realize about the range wars between cattlemen and sheep
Sure,
raising.
yeah.
But starting at 9 years old, every summer, I was put out on one of the haciendas. And by myself, and I was working for room and board. That was it. And again, it was all Peruvians. And I'm a good horseback rider. I learned how to ride well. And particularly Peruvian Indian, they're fatalistic people, but they're hard. They're very hard people. And you fell off the horse, you better
What type of horses do they ride down there?
Oh, they're shaggy things.
Yeah.
At that altitude, because we lived at 14,000 feet.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And some of the haciendas were at 15,500 feet. And if you brought a horse up from the coast, and they tried it, they brought a couple of Morgan horses up. Their hearts burst. They couldn't stand the altitude.
Same thing happened with the CIA brought mules, donkeys. They're like, we're going to bring these out to Afghanistan. And so they brought Missouri Valley mules. Yeah, it didn't work. And then they're like, it's okay. The next generation of mules will be hardier. It's like someone had to break it to them. Like, there's not a subsequent generation.
Hey, wake up, Bobo. I mean, really. Somebody said, oh, well, mules reproduce. Yeah, well, that shows your ignorance.
Yeah.
Mule is the offspring of a donkey and a horse. And,
sure.
And
it wasn't just a heart thing, but Missouri Valley mules want to eat.
Yeah, they eat a lot more.
Right.
And the other thing, they couldn't eat the puma grass in the Andes. They had mules in Peru, but they were locally bred. But the horses, I swear, they were descendants of what Pizarro brought when he came and conquered the Incas. Small, shaggy, some horses, I'm serious, 12, 13 hands.
Wow.
That's small.
Yeah.
And when we first got there, my father had horses for all three of us. I'm one of three brothers. And his way of teaching us to ride, we started bareback. And, when I was 7 or 8, I got an Indian blanket. I thought that was really moving up. Taught me how to cinch it with a rope on the horse and, on and off. And I think by 10 or something, he bought me a McClellan saddle. Nobody knows what a McClellan saddle is. It's the old Civil War saddle.
Yeah.
And we just, before we left Virginia, we donated to the Cavalry Museum of Fort Leavenworth.
So how old are your brothers? Are you the oldest, middle?
I'm the oldest, and
the oldest.
Jim is 2 years younger, and then Douglas is 2.5 years younger.
I can't imagine growing up like that, too. And, how many other, 8 or 9-year-olds are just hanging out, working in the carpentry shop? And to put that into perspective generationally, we couldn't even, let our kids walk to school now, and John's out here speaking Spanish at age 8 and hanging out with the
Kicking hobos off the train.
Mainly because I think it was a mining community and very sparsely populated. The ore trains ran between La Arroya and Cerro de Pasco. Cerro de Pasco was the Incas had mined there. The Spaniards had really expanded it. Cerro de Pasco was at about 14,500 feet. You went across the Junin Pampa, which is just daunting, and then Lake Junin, which is probably one of the most polluted lakes in the world because of mine runoff. But yeah, and then the haciendas. I lived in the quarters where the Indians lived. Except for one of the haciendas, there was no running water. There was no toilets. And, at 14,000, 15,000 feet, it gets cold.
So that austere life kind of really prepared you for being thrust into the Marine Corps as an infantryman, doesn't it?
Well, I credit my father. My brothers disagree with me, but I credit my father for the plain and simple reason. What his intent was, he was a silent man. Margot knew him, not well, but knew him. He could not express emotion. And it was simply, this is what you're going to do.
Yeah.
And I loved it. And I credit him for what I am today, that I survived. A lot of it had to do with him starting me out the way he did. So, my first love affair, lost my virginity at 14. My introduction to racism, the girl was Peruvian, which did not go over well. She was dark, not dark, but darker than her parents. Her parents were whiter than anybody at this table. And he was high up in the accounting department. And I was not allowed in her house, and she was not allowed in my house. She was 17, I was 14. And, I couldn't articulate it, but there was something wrong about that. And I stayed in touch with her until I actually enlisted in the Marine Corps. And on subsequent trips to Peru, I was in a position where I could check, and she's done very well. She's still alive and has grandchildren. But I did not intrude. So, yeah, I grew up fast. And I think, tell them what you thought when you met me in high school.
I can speak now? Oh.
Yeah.
John just wasn't like any other American boy. All of you grew up playing sandlot baseball or, football, whatever, but he was not interested in any of those things. He was a very studious. He was just entirely different than anybody I'd ever met. And, he still is, but that's what I would say.
Was that something that like attracted you to him?
Well, no, honestly, in high school, we were only friends.
Yeah, that's true.
We didn't start dating until he was at the Naval Academy.
I had fantasies. We need not go into those. But Margot is very, very clever. And I was in Algebra 2. That was a senior course. Margot was a junior. Margot was in Algebra 2. And that's when we got to know each other. I met her father, who was an JG at Pearl Harbor, won a Bronze Star that day, was a beachmaster at Kwajalein, retired as an admiral. That's where we met, and it's very true. I would go over to her house, not for a date, and, she came by my house less frequently, unfortunately.
So you guys met in high school, and then where'd you go to high school at?
Well, I'd gone to boarding school for 2 years while my parents were in South America.
Okay.
One was a Quaker school, overloaded on religion at the Quaker school. Been drawing on it ever since. On it. And then I went to a very elite boys' school in Colorado Springs, which is still in existence. And my father came out, taking another position with Utah International in San Francisco. And I will be very frank with you, my 2 years in public high school, I hated it. I absolutely hated it. My father insisted I play football. I hate football. The only sport I'd ever played, and I was very good at it, was soccer. Nobody played soccer then. And quite frankly, Margot and a British kid, Tony, who was also a transfer, and one of the very few, emphasize very few Jewish kids in school. Those were my only friends. I played football. I hated it. My father never came to any of my games. I was lousy at it. I just didn't like it.
How did you balance that with academics in high school?
I think my brothers and I have talked about this because they did not do Phi Beta Kappa in high school. And I lost myself in the studies. It was something that I could, my parents left me alone if I studied. I thought we had good instructors, and all I could think about was getting the hell out of Dodge. And that led to the next stage. My father, from very early on, although he was not in the Marine Corps, he was an officer in the Seabees during World War II. And we were rambunctious kids, the three boys, and Margot knows us all. And, his panacea for everything, wait till the Marines get a hold of you. Well, at age 16, I was ready, and I started visiting the recruiter. And to this day, I remember Staff Sergeant Kelly. And Staff Sergeant Kelly was South Boston. And the other thing that I decided, because my father made it very clear that he would not pay for any of our college. We would have to go to college, and we'd have to work. And I got the idea, and it was true, that I could get appointed from the ranks to the Naval Academy. And I know my father thought that was ridiculous. He didn't say so. And I talked to Staff Sergeant Kelly. Now, Staff Sergeant Kelly was a street fighter, Korean War veteran. And he was just as honest as his day is long. And he said, it's almost impossible, but you can do it.
Which is a kind of an oxymoron when it comes to speaking to any type of recruiter, because normally the stories go, they feed you a line of bullshit and rope guys in. So, but I think, again, generationally is like, you have to everything to prove to us if you want to join this group here. We don't really have to sell you anything. And that is so different from what's going on with the guys who are even young junior officers to me that are now field grade officers on recruiting duty. And, but John, it's interesting that you talk about how you credit your father who instilled like this high degree of discipline as far as work and earning everything. And then you transitioned to high school and you did well academically. And then, your dad still at that point is like, you're paying for your own college and you better find a way. And
we all three did.
Was that kind of like something you respected from your dad when you look back at how he reared you and
we knew nothing else.
Yeah.
I knew kids that were, when I was in high school in the States, I knew kids that, Fountain Valley School in Colorado Springs is still a very elite school. And they were sending people to Yale and Harvard. And even then, that wasn't cheap. And he said, no, you work your way through college.
So, I mean, there's so many, like all of us here as veterans, we join. And I found this as a study, and it'd be a great academic discussion or study is, people that come from broken homes love to join the military because there's a lack of discipline and a lack of structure, and they're drawn to that, I think, innately. And then there's other groups who are reared in these very disciplined families, like your dad was an officer, and you're kind of inculcated into the Marine culture, the military culture, and like that's a natural draw to you. And then there's another group that are immersed in that, and they want nothing to do with the military. So you made that decision, and you enlisted in the Marine Corps at an early age with your intent to use that as your
entree.
Yeah, as your conduit to go to college, to get an education. I mean, the whole time you're thinking higher education.
That's right.
And still is. I mean, to this day, you're still teaching at the collegiate level. So we'll talk about that in a bit.
But there's another aspect to me, and get your red flag ready. I'm a maverick.
Okay.
I've always been a maverick. And, I by the time I turned 17, I turned 17 in October 1961. And, I'm talking to Staff Sergeant Kelly. He said, well, you're 17, you got to have your parents' consent to enlist. Now, two things happened. I said, I think we can do it if you will allow me to suggest how we do it. And he said, talk to me. And I said, well, if you can come by some night about 8 o'clock, because cocktail was de rigueur and cocktail hour in my parents' house. And cocktail hour was minimum 2 old fashions, 2 martinis. And I figured 2000, 8 o'clock at night, they'd probably be on drink number 2. And my father had high regard for Marines. And I said, also, Staff Sergeant Kelly, can you put I didn't know what the hell they were called, blue trousers on with the stripe and the shirt with the tie and your ribbons? Yeah, we can do that, McKay. And he came by, and it was cocktail number 2. And he walked into the house. Margo knows that house. And God, my father, oh, the Marines were right. Staff Sergeant Kelly, what can I get you to drink? And, you know, Kelly was Irish. He wasn't drinking tea. And so, you know, by that time, my parents are into drink number 3. Kelly is good, strong drink. And, you know, it just kind of slipped in. You know, my father's, where you been? What did you do in Korea? And then, Mr. and Mrs. McKay, we got some paperwork here for John to go into the Marine Corps when he graduates from high school. Mm-hmm. And this would just facilitate and make things faster if you don't mind signing. Oh, anything for the Marine Corps. Well, they signed me away. And 2 other things happened. About a month and a half later, we didn't really argue at the table, but there were a few tense moments. And it wasn't grades, it was something minor. And my father said, well, wait till you get yourself in the Marine Corps. And I said, I already am. And that was bad. I mean, there was no fisticuffs or anything. My mother started crying, and he said, let me see those papers. And they realized then, about 6 weeks later.
6 months later.
No, 6 weeks.
Oh, 6 weeks later.
And it was very tense. And I went down that week, it seemed to me, to Staff Sergeant Kelly, and I said, I've got the paperwork now. I said, I want to ship right now to boot camp. And he leans across the table, and I'm going to use profanity. He said, McKay, number 1, if you don't finish high school, I will make sure you never get into the Marine Corps. Never. Do you understand that? And I went, yes, Staff Sergeant. You fucking finish high school and then come back and talk to me about shipping. Do you understand? And that made a much bigger impact on me than my father.
Yeah.
And I never bothered Staff Sergeant, although he did come to graduation.
That's awesome.
And the rest is history. And I was very upfront. I told my drill instructor, Staff Sergeant Thomas, senior drill instructor, you know, what I wanted to do. You know, I was still a screw. I was still a fuck up, but he took me seriously. And you remember, it was week 3, you go to the rifle range. And Camp Matthews was still open then. That's before your time. University of San Diego is there now.
Yeah, Mike Edson Range now.
Yeah, Edson Range. Well, I've got pictures of it in my cruise book from boot camp, but it was pre-qual day, 200-meter line, offhand. I threw one in the deuce ring. The Staff Sergeant Thomas came up, and the PMI, primary marksmanship instructor, he had the 2 canteens, and they just pulled my belt back, and both started kidney punching me. And Staff Sergeant Thomas says, you wouldn't make a pimple on an officer's ass. I fired expert the next day. But anyway.
A style of motivation. One technique.
Yeah.
Which is more, you know, that was done back then. And I think, you know, we've evolved as institutionally as a Marine Corps. And, you know, we talk about why guys join the Marines now and, you know, how we lead and, you know, the types of Marines. I mean, from that type of training and like everything you experienced, I mean, what do you think about how we're training Marines now? Do you think we're too soft on them?
I don't have enough knowledge.
Yeah.
You know, the last time.
Well, we got to get you down to the depot then. Like,
Margo loves Paris Island.
Yeah.
She's saying no.
No, we went to a graduation. I've never been on recruiting duty. I was never stationed at the depot.
Yeah.
I followed vicariously General Krulak's Crucible thing, which I thought was a good thing. But I've never trained. I'm not qualified to comment on how the training compares now.
Well, it's the point I'm making is like that was a different style of leadership. It's very hands on. They felt like physical abuse was negative reinforcement was highly encouraged and accepted and commonplace, and now it's turned 180 where they can't do that. But my position is I think I was kind of on the outs of that. It was more like a good hockey check we'd get from our drill instructors when we went through boot camp. It was never face punches or kidney punch. They knew like that era was waning fast. But I look now at the Marines that are graduating our entry level training, both enlisted and officers, and some people compare them and generationally say, "Oh, they're softer now. They're not going to be as tough. They won't fight as hard." No, I think they're wrong. They're proving it wrong right now as we're winning and fighting still to this day in these two wars we're still doing. And it's interesting too because I think we have this I don't know what it is, like this generational guilt or this war envy because John, was in Vietnam and they lost so many thousands of people during that war, and we've only lost this many. Right. We're not as tough, or we didn't do this. And when I talk to veterans about that, and John's shaking his head no, is if we've lost more Marines in Iraq and Afghanistan, would we be just as good? Would we have as many Silver Star, Navy Cross recipients as we did in World War II and Vietnam if we'd gotten more guys killed? It stymies me to think of the way the public looks at our military through that lens, which our own military looks at their own military through that lens. It's some strange phenomenon. I can't really articulate that well.
I think that has been prevalent in the Marine Corps since World War I. That there's a very perverse pride. Do you know how many we got killed at Chosin?
Yeah.
Do you realize how many died at Guadalcanal? It's almost sort of a reverential honoring of death. And, that harks back to the Nazis and the Germans. And
I would argue that because we've lost less soldiers and Marines in these wars, we're better at what we do. We're employing better technology and leadership styles and tactics. I mean, it just, the numbers are there. And I mean, granted, we're not fighting conventional force either, so it's a different playing field, and the dynamics are so.
But there is an evolution
fluid.
in how we are better at leadership. We have more tools to lead with, and then Johnny Walker's wife. We had a guy named Johnny Walker on the show, and he did so many SEAL missions as an interpreter from Iraq that the SEALs say you can wear a trident and you're part of us, and so he's 100% in their brotherhood. But his wife was telling a story of her and her kids in Iraq, and they were going to school, and all of a sudden a firefight breaks out. And, she's running across the street to try to do something for her kids, and what's she going to do in a firefight? And then an American comes up, and this is what we ask of our young people that are softer, and that guy says, "Ma'am, you go over there and be safe," puts himself in between the line of fire to cover her, and then they start addressing her kids while there's a firefight that they're fully engaged in. And that is a totally different dynamic, not better, just a completely super challenging liquid dynamic where everything is constantly in motion for these young guys that are out there doing it. How do you prepare for that? You can't just kick someone in the head and tell them to get tougher.
Well, the other thing, and I'm not, I haven't been to Iraq. I haven't been to Afghanistan. I was in Afghanistan a long time ago when the Mujahideen were the good guys. What I understand, I don't know. There's not today, and correct me if I don't feel that there's the put down racial, religious, ethnic attitude on the part of most U.S. forces that you saw in Vietnam.
It is. I have discussed this with academics like you. Is generally, it's funny. You were talking about your first exposure to racism, and you look generationally. World War I, the way we describe the enemy, Krauts or Nips or Gooks, or in Afghanistan and in Iraq, and these wars have been fighting. I never recall my Marines using those cultural or racial slurs. It was always the enemy or the insurgents. And I think that because our young men and women who fight, they definitely are taught and they learn this cultural understanding, which is, I submit, is that's how you win the war. And we're not, because no one's defined what winning is to us at the executive level, but nonetheless, the people that are doing the actual fighting, they're winning because they understand how to interact with the culture. And I think that's vastly different.
Well, I've published on that. If you look at my website, I can't remember the exact title of it. It was done in Military Review a couple of years ago. The foreign language knowledge and cultural appreciation is a force builder. And when I say language, I'm not talking about going to DLI. I'm talking somebody like myself. I'm bilingual. I can sit down. I could probably even, don't use it every day, I could even have a philosophical discussion with a native speaker and talk about philosophy. DLI doesn't prepare you for that. But I think somewhere along the line, somebody's gotten smart. And the things that you just brought up is what I hear. There's, number one, there's not the automatic, they're the other, and they're not as good as we are. I mean, I was unusual in Vietnam because I said, I'll tell you what, give the NBA the same weapon systems we had. They'd kick our ass. They were good.
You come from a totally different upbringing. You have this vast understanding of culture, this diverse background. You speak a second language, and then you're thrust into Vietnam. So you're automatically looking at things through a different lens, but you're surrounded by all these other Marines and soldiers who are like, kill them all. And I mean, at what point at a young age when you're fighting over there in 67, 68, are you like, you guys are like, were you just in survival mode the whole time? Or was there a point where you said, we're never going to win this unless we do this?
That's an interesting question because, as I mentioned down in San Francisco, I went to Vietnam the first time in 67. It was a special program out of the academy. There was 200 of us. Number one, we had to be volunteers. Number two, we had to be screened. And I don't think they made the 200, which I found interesting. And we were supposed to be on ships offshore Vietnam, i.e. the gun line. And I was on the USS Alt, 863. The commander was a Commander Brady, who just recently died. And my first day on the ship, certainly was in the captain's cabin, it was the wardroom. He had me come in and said, well, Midshipman McKay, are you going Navy Aviation, Navy Line when you get out? And I said, no, sir, I'm going to the Marine Corps. And
I'm going to have Margot take a couple pictures.
His response was, what the hell are you doing on my ship? And I said, I wanted to see what's going on. He said, I tell you what, I'm going to break orders and I'm going to break Navy policy. I'm going to put you ashore. And he said, I'm going to put you on the swift boats. And he said, I'll write your fitness report, but I'm not going to keep you on the ship because you want to see what it's like. That was another break. I came out of that. I worked with 1st Anglico up in...
Because you were an infantry officer. I mean,
no, I was a midshipman.
You were a midshipman at the time. Okay.
First-class midshipman. Worked with Anglico and down around a place called Southern I Corps, Cape Mai, Batango. And I felt sorry for those guys. And the real eye-opener was I got on the swift boats. And I was up and down the whole coast of Vietnam. I went down to Bang Tao, never got into the Mekong Delta. And, we were intercepting junks, going through Nuc bomb bats as big as this room. And that stinks. And I watched these people. I watched how the Americans treated them. And the Navy, US Navy was pretty good. The swift people were pretty good. And they had some that spoke some Vietnamese. I said, we can't win this war.
This episode of the Break It Down Show is brought to you by Lions Rock Productions.
That's us.
We publish, evaluate, and develop podcasts just like this one, consult others to build their own, and create associated content and content marketing strategies.
So if you're launching or expanding your social media presence, your business, or your personal brand, or if you just want to take your media presence to the next level,
reach out to us on Twitter
at Pete A. Turner
or at JohnLG69.
at the Break It Down Show.
There's 1,000 ways to get a hold of us.
Now enjoy the show.
In the Navy, U.S. Navy was pretty good. The Swift people were pretty good. And they had some that spoke some Vietnamese. I said, we can't win this war.
Even as a midshipman.
As a midshipman, first class in 1967.
So you go back. So walk me through that, John. You go back to the academy. You've got this unheard of experience as a midshipman. I mean, that just would not happen. They're not going like, hey, we're going to fly a 747 of 10 midshipmen over to Afghanistan just to get a taste of this.
Yeah.
They're going to see the worst of humanity in the war, and then they're going to go back, graduate. And then what are you talking to your fellow middies about? You're like, nah, this really isn't for me. Or did it add fuel to your fire? Like, I find that so fascinating. Is you're a midshipman about ready to enter active duty service.
Right.
And you're looking at a war that the country's immersed in, embroiled in this war, boiling
I'm
over.
Convinced we couldn't
and you're
win.
thinking, we can't win this thing, but you're still going to go over, which you do.
And
let me just say this real quick, too. Your website is coljohnmckay.com, COL John McKay.com. And then you've published in the last, that article on language is 2016. So for a guy that's like, we can't win, you're still fighting all these years later, too. I just wanted to say that real quick to the audience.
No, it's huge,
incredible.
So take us to that, like that snapshot of you go back off the ship after being in country and seeing that, and then you got to graduate and then pick up.
Well, not only graduate, but with the full knowledge you were coming back and you had to be infantry. Not because anybody said.
Right. Because you get an option for those listeners that don't know. It's like you could go into the Navy, the big Navy, or you can Marine option and go.
Or you could go into Marine Air.
In Marine Air, yeah.
Now, you got to think of the political situation. What happened in March of 1968? Gentlemen?
You're the history teacher.
I don't teach history. I teach geography. President Johnson says he will not run for re-election. Nixon is campaigning on peace. Read the cards. We've lost. We want to get out. And yet, it wasn't I had to go. I wanted to go. Can I hold up? Can I do it?
What did you have to prove and to who? John?
Myself.
Given all you had done, though.
Yeah, but nobody had ever shot at me. Nobody had ever tried to kill me.
Right. But, Sergeant Kelly's like, this is impossible. You might be able to pull off the impossible. You did.
Well,
you still were trying to prove it to yourself?
There's a big difference of doing academic and trying to get into a college and going against somebody aiming at you to kill you. There's a big difference. I'm sorry.
So you go and do it, and I was just talking about this to a civilian lawyer at lunch, is a guy that's been shot at and in a couple combat zones. I used to remark at how the young Marines would get in their first firefight, and they all have visions of running into battle against an inferior trained enemy, and it's going to be glorious, and we're going to kill them all. And right when the round starts smacking the wall next to them, they're like, this is not that. And I'm not a big fan of getting shot at, for the record. The romance of that shit wore off real quick. But, for the young guys, like, there's a lot of allure and romance to that until that one singular moment where their best friend goes down right next to them. And that's really when you realize, yeah, you've proved something, but you also understand that the immense sacrifice you
make.
And that
tremendous cost. I joined Hotel 25, December 1968. They were in the jungle. It was Operation Taylor Common. Look it up. That night, and it was deep jungle, triple canopy. And Margot knows some of these guys. That night, some kid had dysentery, and he got outside the perimeter in the jungle. And one of the guys on the line shot. He didn't hit him. We just gotten the M16s. Didn't hit him, but there was a piece of shrapnel that went into his penis. And try to get a helicopter in at 0200 in the morning in triple canopy, no moon. We didn't get him out for about 2 hours, but he had bled out. That was my initiation to fire. Corpsman, he was my platoon corpsman at the time, is Doc Sonderman. Margot knows him. He still has nightmares about that. He said, I should have met him back in 3 days before because he had dysentery.
Nothing. Yeah, for people that don't understand too, the corpsman to make those life and death decisions, he was an 18-year-old kid, 19, 20 years old.
19.
Yeah. You know, and
because you petty
the
officer
immense
second.
responsibility that I just like to always share that because you know, if people haven't listened to our show, we get a lot of military guests on and authors and some, you know, but to really gain that perspective is like, oh, why didn't he do that? Why, he's a doctor. We call him Doc, but no, he's a 19-year-old kid who gets 8 weeks of training on how to jam a wad of, you know, cotton into a wound and like stick a guy with a needle in an IV bag. And that's hopefully going to save their life. They get a lot better training now, but I think that people understand is you're surrounded by all this chaos and these are those small pieces of trauma that you accumulate in war and in life. And you got to figure out a way to either keep them packed up or unpack them at some point in your life. And it's not always easy.
Well, 2 days later was the first firefight. And this sounds absolutely ridiculous. You know, I had no problem reacting. I had no problem. It was in the jungle. You don't know where the hell the fire's coming from. And I hadn't been around long enough that I could, you know, locate direction by sound. And I remember yelling to get a gun up, machine gun. And I'm thinking at the same time, why would anybody want to kill me?
I'm a nice guy, goddammit.
Why
are these guys trying to kill me?
I don't even know this guy.
I'm a swell guy.
And he's trying to kill me. You get over that real quick.
Yeah.
There's something that happens when you first have a bullet whiz by or whatever it is, or like your corpsman, you know, who probably had to make that life or death decision, didn't have a sense for when life and death starts, you know, but once you're in that fight, it gets real clear, like, this is serious. And that, I remember when combat slowed down for me, where I'm doing quotey fingers, calm in this moment, because it was no longer faster than I can handle. It had slowed down. Does that resonate with you at all?
You know, I'm probably fantasizing. There were times at night when we got attacked. I never felt completely out of control. I felt very concerned, and I take a great deal of pride in that because I've watched other men under extreme duress. And some people break. And you know, whether you break or not, doesn't really matter if you're wearing a gold bar or a chevron. And I never felt I reached that point. You know, some of the people that I know, you know, that have been in really bad things, would you held up as well? I feel I did. What about something like Way City, where it's just the incessant, same damn stuff? I don't know. I never felt that I lost control. And yes, it was very chaotic, but I took a certain pride in that I could operate within that chaos. And the other consideration, after we came off at Taylor Common, we went back into the rice paddies right before I was wounded the first time. This was another thing. You know, Jim Webb does it very well in his book, Fields of Fire, the Arizona Territory, up north Van Wah, on the Songtabon River. It dawned on me very early, whether you were running squad patrols, which I would take half of those. Usually we ran platoon patrols, and it wasn't 48 men or 49 men. You know, I was lucky if I had 32 with guns and rockets attached. That's what you were dealing with. Every time you went outside the perimeter, whether it was a company perimeter or battalion perimeter, you took casualties. And your prayer going out of the wire was, God, don't let anybody die today.
Every single time, though.
Every time you went out, somebody got hurt.
Yeah. You know, when I talk to gentlemen like you, and even some of my World War II vets, you know, guys, we've had Herschel Woody Williams on the show, and you know, when you hear stories like that, it really does again illuminate the fact that war is timeless. And even for our generation in certain circumstances. And there's these, war is this sine wave of high periods and low periods of fighting. And some people are thrust into the high points. Some people sit in the lows and the doldrums, but those that experience those really punctuated, intense, chaotic moments, you do say to yourself every time you leave the wire, it's not a matter of if we're going to get shot at, it's when and how much.
And what are you going to suffer?
And what's going to happen this, and having those plans to really take care of your boys and hope that, you can get them out in time. It's overwhelming. And to have the mental toughness like you did, what have you thought about some of the people? I think they're personally like sycophants if they think that because some people break in war, they're less of a soldier, they're less of a Marine. I just feel that there's so many different levels of the human condition that having seen so much and experienced so many different levels, like I can't help but feel some sympathy or empathy in some cases for others, that I don't think them less of a Marine because of how they reacted to that, because everyone is programmed differently. Have you experienced that from commanders you've worked for or fellow Marines or these battle-hardened guys that say, oh, he's not suffering? Like, I've seen suffering.
Yeah, I've experienced that. And I like to use the example, and he doesn't mind, by the way, General Morgan, former Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps. In Korea, General Morgan froze in the cockpit. He was an aviator. He froze in the cockpit. He couldn't fly his plane. And I got to know General Morgan very well because I had all the black programs at headquarters, which were very few. Marine Corps wasn't in at that level. 5 of those programs, only General Morgan and I were the only ones that could know about it. I'd work with the other services with it, but the commandant didn't even know about it. And we got to know each other pretty well. And he said, I don't know what happened to me, John. He said, I went on. I got involved in aerial combat twice after that. I acquitted myself well. It's never repeated itself. But he said, I could not fly the plane. He made 4 stars, and I think he was a very competent officer. Roundabout way to answer your question.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great example. I mean, I've never heard that story either, but I'm always talking about that, using those words about, and for General Morgan to share that story with you, I think is indicative of what I value in great leaders, is sharing the wins and the losses with subordinates. And that takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of character, which I didn't have, I think, as a younger guy, as a younger officer, because we breed this culture of, bravado and hubris at times, and, pounding our chests. And it does take some age and wisdom to really develop that. And if I could go back and cut out those words like ego and pride and impatience, I just cut them out like a cancer in my career, because I think they made me a less effective officer, a less effective leader. And I'm not saying that I did things bad, but I think that that's such a great story of being able to share those things. And I like to be human. I think the Marines can understand that. And this is a Mustang too, which is, for those that aren't listening, it's a horse of many different breeds. So you got a little officer, a little bit of enlisted, but the Marines see that in you, and they have a balance. So there's a connection. But Mustang officers, I always viewed as like they're either really, really good, or they're really think like I've been there, done that, and sometimes the rules don't apply. So it's not always a benefit if sometimes people ask me the question. I'm going to ask you this question. I'm not going to give the answer. Do you think being enlisted made you a better officer?
Absolutely. And you have to remember, I finished boot camp. I finished ITR end of August 1962. I was designated for an artillery MOS, what the hell, what it was, 57, 08, 57, something like that. Artillery battalion. And I was ordered to First Field Artillery Group at 29 Palms, which was part of the old Force Troops, Pacific. Now, of course, the WAGs in the Marine Corps break down First Field Artillery to initials in its first FAG, so that,
So you got that going for you.
We mounted out. We mounted out for Cuba. Now, First Field Artillery Group did not go as a group. They supplemented 11th Marines. And I was a newbie. And I remember right before they were convoying back and forth from 29 Palms to Coronado, loading ships. I remember convoy duty, and I remember sitting in the goddamn sun weaving camouflage nets. Now, did that make me a better officer? Probably not. But, I know what it took. And then we went. We sailed. It was a big group. I don't know. 2nd Division was standing by already. And it was chuck and jive all the way down to the Panama Canal. We were running blackout. You weren't supposed to go out on deck at night. They had blackout curtains. This was real stuff, victory at sea and all that shit. And we got down to Panama. We traversed the canal at night, blackout. We got over to Cologne. We sailed off, lost landfall, and we're told to muster. We were on an LST, USS Holmes County. Told to muster on the tank deck. And they said, okay, boys and girls, start breaking out the artillery rounds and matching them up with the fuses. We're going to land. And I'm going, I just turned 18. Kennedy giving his speech. And I'm going, wow. And the old LSTs, they were all diesel engines. Troop quarters were right over the engines. We were 4 deep, no air conditioning. Diesel fumes coming up. I didn't sleep for long. What's this going to be like? What's this going to be like? And we steamed around. And thank God we didn't land. Both those speeches, the 2 units that were going to land was 1st Marine Division, reinforced by elements of 2nd, and the 7th Infantry Division out of Fort Ord. As it's come out in a book that was published in 2008, Margaret and I went to the book signing. Both those beaches were targeted with tactical nuclear weapons by the Russians. And as the author states, the Russian commander had release authority in Cuba. Been a crispy critter. Wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today. I didn't know that until 2008. But so I had that. I turned 18. I'm supposed to be doing an amphibious landing against an opposed beach. Get you thinking. But not the same thing when somebody's shooting at you. And why the fuck does he want to shoot me? I didn't do anything to him.
Yeah.
It don't matter.
That's a pretty historical precursor, talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis and floating through the canal and then doing laps around at that time, our sworn enemy, Fidel Castro, and the massing of Russian troops and Kennedy's decision and what some view as great wherewithal and patience to, let that situation unfold the way it did through diplomacy, and also shows of, multiple shows of force.
Yeah.
And then, so you're a young Marine too, and you're embarked on amphibious ship. You're like, this is it. I'm going to war. What every Marine wants. And then they're like, nope, game's called on account of rain. So you got to go back. But then again, you ultimately got your game day in Vietnam in '67 when you went in. And
let me quote Margot. I know I'm different. I was brought up different. I've had different experiences. And I think one of the things that is one of my strengths, and again, wave the red flag, Margot, but I think about those things. It's not, oh, well, shit, that's happened, let's move on. I don't dwell on it, but what does this mean? How does this affect me? How would I act? And I'm not saying I'm the only person that does that, but I haven't met too many other people that have.
So people from your peer group, your generation, guys you grew up through the Marine Corps, and how many years did you spend in the Marine Corps when you retired?
37.
37 years. Non-hacker. Guy dropped his back, couldn't do 40.
Yeah, I couldn't.
I quit at 24, so I'm even weaker than you.
Didn't make 40.
Yeah, it was weak.
Didn't ask for the waiver after 62.
But when you talk to your peer group, are you one of those guys that likes to talk about what you've learned from all those lessons, or just sit around and tell fucking war stories all day?
No, I think. And Margot's been with me. I mean, we have, as you probably gathered, we have a very unique marriage. She goes with me every place. war stories, I told you in the email, you start talking about war story, it's either bullshit or it's a macho deal. I'm not interested. I don't need to prove myself to anybody.
Yeah.
Why? How did we get there? What did we do or didn't do? How does that affect the Marine Corps? How does it affect my troops? How does it affect the country? Yeah, I like to talk about that.
I think that's my answer too, is no, we don't like to sit around. That's why people ask me, do you belong to the VFW? Do you belong to American Legion? I'm like, no, I don't, because I don't enjoy I'm not saying they're not great organizations, don't do good things, but I guess I'm stereotyped to the fact that I don't want to go sit in an environment and listen to guys talk about war. I want to talk about things like this, about why did we do those things? And then your understanding of the world stage, not only through your upbringing, but through what you're teaching now through geography and, Latin American culture and through Middle Eastern culture at, Cal State, Sacramento. And how do we get better? How do we move forward with this? And I'm no academic, I don't at least put myself in that bucket, but I do like to write about those things and engage people like you that have a vast perspective on how do we get better at these things? How do we continue to not only support our military, build our country, make it stronger? So our bumper stickers always say, number one, America. I think those are the real discussions that we really need to engage and not be scared to have them.
I've got thoughts. I mean, you in a different context have been exposed to the Muslim world. Nobody was shooting at me when I worked with Muslims. And as I've said before, and I will tell anybody to their face, I thought they were great people. They had their shitbirds. They had their bad people. But I don't need to go to Saudi Arabia or Palestine to find them. I walk down a couple blocks and find some of those.
I don't know. This is a pretty nice neighborhood. It'd be hard pressed.
Pretty swanky around here.
It's pretty highbrow for McKay. I mean, he's really moved up in the world. Oh, that's Margot. You married up, like most of us. Yeah. So she's shaking her head. Yeah. She's like, of course he did.
But read my article if you would, and I think I told Scott I did the Spanish. I didn't do the Portuguese. That's been translated, and it's in the Military Review Portuguese and Spanish editions. Again, year and a half, 2 years old. But I think it's a very good article in the sense of what we ought to be looking at. And going back to what you just said, and I emphasize it in my class, how do you get rid of prejudice? How do you get rid of bigotry? Are the Marine Corps, the Army, the Navy, are they working on that? Not in the sense that here's the lesson plan to get rid of bigotry, but in the sense
one.
Yeah, right. But in the sense,
I know the captain that wrote that. He's a jackass.
I hate that guy. Don't be intolerant.
And
you got a name for that, John.
If you go to, we're off topic here, but you go to the museum, the letters there, I think it was written in it was after the Revolutionary War, 1787. It was a major on a captain, because it's all handwritten out in that 18th century handwriting. And I mean, he's a scoundrel, he's a womanizer, he's a drunk. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And the kicker is, and beside that, he's an Irishman. And I mean,
always a good insult.
And, I see it, Margot has seen it. And I hate to admit it, no names named, in our own families. Oh, he's from India. I won't have anything to do with those people. He's black. No. I don't know how you get rid of that. And to have the tolerance. I mean, yes, I had different upbringing. I've got a much broader view of things. As I've said, and I shock some of our family members. I say, I love the Muslims. I think they're fantastic people. And I just wish I had enough time in my busy day that I could study things like the
Yeah,
Quran.
pragmatism's not one of our leadership traits or principles that we see in the schools professional warriors attend. And guys like you, guys like, I'll throw Marlantis' name out there, or maybe even a guy like Jim Webb, who tend to come through all the things in your generation that you did. A little bit of tendency, although they respect the work that they've done as artists and sharing the stories, kind of put them in this category of, oh, you're turning against the organization, or you're too liberal, or I call it just being smart about things and being progressive. And that's one of the things that I'm going to ask you is, with not just a racial issue, which was a massive hot button issue in the 60s and 70s in the Marine Corps as we transitioned, but what about now? We've got homosexuals in the military, we've got transgender issues arising, and we just graduated the first fully integrated female recruit training company from India Company. What do you think about that? And I like asking a guy from your generation.
I've published on that.
Yeah.
I've published on that. I won the...
But in short, you're in favor of it.
No, I'm not. I'm going to weasel out. I'm going to say, it's like marijuana today. Maybe we ought to step back and take a real hard look at this. And what do we want, and how are we going to get there? I wrote a essay in 2012. It won the MOA essay contest. And I asked those questions. It's on my website. No, it's not. MOA wouldn't give me copyright. I think it's a damn good essay. And it's asking those questions. I did a book review, which is on my website, in Parameters, on McGinnis's book, which has an inflammatory title. But I bring up those issues. I use the review to express my own views, okay? And I think that's a good review. And there's a lot of aspects of it. You know, I don't know what infantry fighting's like today. If there were women in Vietnam, even in very good shape, and I got this from, believe it or not, some looking at some dead bodies, NBA dead bodies. Now, they use women a lot for couriers, and they used some of them for sappers. This is very gross, but they had serious problems with women hygiene. And these are natives. I mean, they're from the region. Strength, I think, is an issue. There's been very recently a couple of articles. The VA is being overwhelmed by women veterans that are having problems, combat or conflict related, that they weren't seeing in men. Is the society prepared to pick that up? And the last thing, I really get upset about this. You put men and women together, particularly at 17, 18, 19, 20 years old, and guess what? And you put them under stress, guess what, twice. And some of them get killed, and things happen, and guess what, 3 times. That is not good for unit integrity, in my opinion. And that's my reservation. I've commanded women units, not women units. I've commanded units with women in them. Now, it was peacetime and it was static, JTF 160. The problems I had with fraternization, you know, and I saw at my own 3 shop, and we were downsizing as we got the migrants to the States, and most of them came to the States. You know, population dwindled. I took over, it was over 12,000. My troop strength with civilians, you know, NGOs and all that crap, was just under 4,000. And we shrunk, and we did a damn good job of it. That's the reason you never read about it, because it was so successful. We shut it down early. But in my own 3 shop, I had an Army colonel, which was an interesting thing also in the sense that I was a colonel. All my chief staff personnel and my component commanders, Navy, Air Force, and Army, were all colonels. Now, you know, that's a leadership challenge. And I'm the boss doesn't really get it, if you understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I'm the commander. That doesn't really get it.
let's shift gears real quick because we could do like multiple episodes on this with everything you do, but for this episode, with all of the experience like through your life and through the Marine Corps and like the challenge, you're still teaching now. You're still leading. You're teaching at Sac State.
She makes me.
She's got a high lifestyle she needs to maintain up here, very highbrow. But what is it that you love the most about sharing your life experiences with those you teach now, and also with the veteran community that you're still really connected to? Because I know you're at the club, you still associate with a lot of Marine organizations. Well, what is that message that you love to share with them? Like, what is it that you wake up every morning, you're like, God, I can't wait to teach these kids this?
To mentor young people. Mentor them in the sense of personal responsibility, that there is an obligation to something higher than yourself. I think Margo will share that. I've been very fortunate. I've had some very good students. I don't know if I mentioned at the club. I've got 3 that have gone in or will go in as commissioned officers, U.S. Armed Forces. We have a gal that you want to talk about a real horror story of being brought up. Brother was a Marine, was in Iraq, came back, overdosed, committed suicide. Her sister, mainline heroin. She never told Margo and I. She's been to the house several times. I think her father abused her sexually, and she just got into a master's program down in Fresno. And the only thing I have to forewarn you about, and Margo will tell you the same thing, she'll drink you under the table. And she's very pretty. She's very pretty. And the type of people you're dealing with, and I gravitate towards this people. Second day of class. My first day of class was, I think, a Thursday, so I had the weekend. And the next one was Tuesday or whatever it was. And she came in all beat up. And another kid that I think is going to get into the Air Force as a commissioned officer, this Russian kid, no less, Dennis. I said, Dennis, none of my business, but is your boyfriend whooping up on her? Dennis steps back and he goes, Professor, she plays rugby. That's the type of person I can gravitate to. And if I can channel that type of energy, that's what gives me a sense of accomplishment.
We've had you for well over an hour. It's easy to do, and there's so much more to talk about. So we'll have to do another one of these. But I just have one more question for you.
On the record or off the record?
On the record.
Okay.
And Scott can ask whatever he wants. But we had Jack Brennan on, and a lot of times I like to ask, our guests that have a lot of experience and wisdom, questions that kind of guide us, mentor us a little bit. And, we get inflamed about President Trump and this problem and this political divide. And this is the worst time ever. And I always say that's just nonsense, because there's been a Revolutionary War. Your era was extremely, combative and everything. What are your thoughts? Where are we at right now?
Margo, and rightfully so. We've got 3 boys between us. All of them have served. We worry about their futures. And yeah, people do get very incensed, one way or the other. Yeah. Either pro or against President Trump. I have my own personal feelings. I keep telling Margo, step back. Mm-hmm. Look at the Democratic National Convention in 1968.
Yeah.
Look at the Democratic nomination process, where you had a person that was revealed having gone through psychiatric treatment. He was going to be a contender. You had Richard Nixon and Watergate. To me, Watergate was probably one of the more critical crises we've had in this country.
Yeah.
Now, regardless of what your position is and thoughts about President Trump, I don't think he's going to go down in history as one of the greats, but I can't get wrapped around the axle. And I used to make Margo upset because I said, going back to February this year, I said, the Mueller report's not going to find anything. There's going to be a lot of dirt. There's going to be things that are going to fall out afterwards. And I said, watch the Attorney General in New York. Watch the federal prosecutor in the Southern District of New York. That's what's going to come out there. And
I was feeling vindicated on the way up. I wrote an article as this was unfolding called Protecting Your Tribe. Bob Mueller. Hey, Bob, if you're listening, magnificent bastard, 2-4. I want to stick by the guy. And I says, hey, you know what? He's a Republican. He's conservative. And he's doing his job. He's not a criminal, not indicted. So I said, stop ganging up on Mueller. And he's done a great job. And every guy I knew in close protection that worked with him, Marines, said he is the guy. And so I feel a little vindicated. And I published an article against all the sage mentors I had, and I won't mention any names, like, Scotty, hit the brakes on this. And so I feel like, but I also told Bob Mueller at the same time in the article, which he didn't respond to. He's a pretty busy guy, but I said at the end of the day, too, publish a report, man. Come on, it's been 2 years, $10 million a year.
I hope he does.
And we got that. Yeah. So, Bob, if you're listening to, we want you in the 2-4 Association, brother,
and on the Break It Down show.
And on the Break It Down show.
You know, I met him very briefly. And another little episode, as I think Scotty knows, I testified in the Iran-Contra hearings.
Oh, no kidding.
For the government, specifically against North.
Which was classified for a long time.
Yeah, it may still be.
Yeah.
And I also, based on that testimony, had an Article 32 for violation of the War Powers Act. And very clever Navy Captain Jag, I was a lieutenant colonel. He was smart enough that War Powers Act had never been tried in court. It's never been tried. It won't be tried. It will be declared unconstitutional. But he was going to make sure I perjured myself. And that's big time.
Yeah. I think it's worth noting, too, because John's such a humble guy. Like, some of your classmates at the academy and some of the guys you grew up in with are some pretty notable people that he knows quite well. And we were talking about this in the Marines Memorial Club, like, just because what's so cool about this is the John McKays of the world. They're not in the limelight. They're not glory hounds. They're not, seekers of fame, yet they've done all these great things. But you're very well connected and have close personal relationships with
Mike Mullen,
Jim Webb. Who else? Well, we were talking about this at the club. It was just fascinating because you never know. You're looking at you're looking at this guy, and we've done this before. And you sit around like, I wonder who that guy knows. Yeah, and you just never know until you like. And you guys know me. Like, I just introduced myself. I'm kind of a nosy guy because I'm a writer and I'm a Marine, so I'm a little boisterous. And I was actually like probably hitting on Margot and like complimenting her. And John steps up. He's like, "Hey, Marine, watch yourself." He's like giving me on the spot counseling. But it's interesting to. When we sat up there and you started talking, and it wasn't until after that in our short friendship that, just another great guy that, John, I'm proud to, call you fellow Marine and friend. And,
absolutely.
We loved having you on the show, Margot, for having us in your home and for the walnut cake. Yeah. Bullshit, checking as we're sitting here, and it'd be great to do it again.
Yeah, for sure.
If people want to find out more about what you do, they want to go to your website, which is what?
He's got his
ColonelJohnMcKay.com, and I'll put that in the show notes.
www.COLJOHNMCKAY. Put it out.
We'll have it on the show notes and on the website.
It's not up to date. You might mention that because I haven't put the Gold Star Mothers. I've had a couple of something else published. I was guest of honor at junior ROTC graduation. A bunch of stuff we've done we got to put up there, and I've got to make a couple of corrections.
You're a busy dude. You get things done.
That's why I can't do these gadgets.
Because you're out doing things.
And, Margot enjoys TV, serious TV, except there's a little niche that...
Everybody gets to have a little niche. It's all right.
Yeah, police procedurals, as I call them.
Yeah.
But seriously, she's a wonderful muse. And, like a lot of us, I came back from Vietnam. I wasn't too much later, I was in El Salvador, killing people again, almost getting killed. Very tragic thing happened to me there. And, slowly over a period of time, I fell into a bottle of whiskey. And, My brothers were aware of it. It was never talked about as sort of like the crazy uncle in the basement syndrome. She's the one that pulled me out.
Muse is high praise. I don't think there be any more than that as far as someone that inspires you in your life to keep moving. When you do hit those low points and you slip and fall and someone grabs you by the back and picks you up and you keep marching. So,
yeah, but a lot of people don't get picked up.
No, they don't.
A lot of people don't.
We're lucky to have this Marine Corps family and each other to do that in some cases. I think that's important. So,
but she's, everybody was lauding me for the talk down in San Francisco, and I put my heart and soul into that. She helped.
Well, that's good.
She helped.